There's only 24 hours in a day. I got a pair of earbuds and I wish there was a way that I could know just what I want to listen to. There's 150,000 shows that I'm not sitting through. When the world is dark and boring, let us do your exploring. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Welcome to Pod on Pod, a guide to the world of podcasts because it's not your daddy's radio. We're your hosts.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Joel. Hi, poppers. Hi, newbies to the show. We are Pod on Pod, and every week we review a different podcast for you. We put those out Wednesday mornings, and you can subscribe at podonpod.com. You can follow us on Twitter or Facebook. But what we're all about is introducing you to new shows. We like to review some pretty big shows, some pretty small shows, mix in some listener requests along the way. This week, we're going to be talking about Pauly Shore's Interested.
Yes, we are.
This is one of the shows that you suggested to add to the list.
I pushed for it pretty hard early.
And you started listening to it right when it came out, right?
Yeah.
And how did you find the show? How did you hear about it?
I heard about it through WTF whenever Mark Maron interviewed him.
Oh, okay. So Mark interviewed Pauly?
Yeah, and Pauly plugged his podcast.
Mark is on the show as well. He's one of
Yeah.
the episodes that I listen to, as a matter of fact. The way that we review a show here on Pod is we break it down through 4 criteria. We talk about audio quality, we talk about host likability, we talk about production values, and then the content itself. And then at the end of the thing, we rate it overall with earbuds. We don't talk about stars or thumbs up. We'll explain that later, though. Right now, let's get right into it and tell you what this show is all about. You can find more at paulyshore.com, or you can go straight to the show, paulyshore.com/podcast. But either way, he's got it highlighted there. This is one of his sort of main projects right now.
Yeah.
Is this Pauly's first podcast?
I couldn't possibly tell you.
He doesn't reference a previous one if he's done one. I know that he's been on lots of podcasts before.
Yeah, and here's one of the things with our show in particular is we listen to 3 shows, and if it's not said on that show or we don't get the feeling from those 3 shows, then we're not going to know.
That's
so
probably
he's
true.
Never said on any of the episodes that I've listened to that he's done one.
Here's the interesting thing about this podcast, the thing that it sets it apart from anything that we've reviewed so far, anything that I've ever listened to, as a matter of fact. I'm not saying that it's the only show out there. As a matter of fact, there's enough podcasts, I'm imagining someone else does this, but I've never heard of it before. Pauly interviews an interesting guest, generally a comic, or, well, I think it's always a comic on the ones that I listen to anyway.
Or a comic's wife.
Yeah, or a comic's wife about the comic in
Yeah.
the case of when he's talking about a subject who's passed away. But then he has a secondary interview
Yes.
where they discuss and comment on the first interview.
And the cool thing is some of the ones that I listen to is there's always a connection between the two.
Yes. For instance, one of the episodes that I listened to, as a matter of fact, it's the one that I just finished. It's the one that features Mark Maron. The topic of discussion is actually Lenny Bruce, but it's Kitty Bruce, which is the daughter of Lenny. She's the main interview, and then Mark Maron sits in with Pauly to listen to that interview and discuss it. It's sort of like watching a movie and getting the director's commentary all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot like that.
It's really a fascinating idea, and some of the pairings make for like especially interesting combinations. These are the shows that I listen to. I listened to the Rick Overton and Ed Begley Jr. episode. They were discussing Robin Williams. Rick Overton is one of Robin's, or was one of Robin's best friends. Ed Begley Jr.'s known Robin for years and years and years, and both of those guys have relationships with Pauly, as did Robin, and so all 3 of them got to sort of commiserate after that loss. The Michael Steele and Jared Carmichael episode, this was one where he steps outside the bounds of comedy. Michael Steele, the former, I think he was the head of the RNC at one point. He was the chairman of the Republican National Committee, or Republican National Party. And he's been a prominent figure in the Republican Party, a prominent commentator on conservative politics for a long time now. Pauly interviewed Michael, and then Jared Carmichael, who's a comic, an African-American comic, was the sit-in with Pauly to discuss that interview. That was a really interesting take. And then the last one, before I got to the Mark Maron episode, which I actually just finished tonight, Carrot Top was the actual interview.
Yeah. Yeah.
Larry the Cable Guy, the commentary on that, along with Pauly. And I didn't know this until this episode.
They came up together.
Yeah, in Florida. Those
Yeah.
two guys came from the same club, sort of walk-ons to the mic in the same club. And so they've got this long history and a deep affinity for each other, even though they are like on sort of opposite ends of the comedy spectrum. I almost feel like very, very strange, but the connections there were great. So that's what the show is about. It's two interviews done at once with all sort of a one cohesive topic.
Yeah.
Overall, what was it? The format, when you first mentioned the format, that's the thing that most excited me about the show. I was not excited to hear a show starring Pauly Shore. I was interested, to use his word. I was interested to use his word to check out this format. Which one was it that drew you in? It was Pauly?
Yeah, it was definitely Pauly. Yeah, I mean, he's a 90s icon, man.
Well, let's segue right there and talk a little bit, instead of the content, let's talk about the host likability, because I think this show, or this one, is going to be a stumbling block for a lot of people. Kids our age in the 90s, I think, have a deep affinity for, a lot of us anyway, have a deep affinity for Pauly Shore, but at the same time, he, like a certain kind of music, like a certain brand of movies, it's one of those things in our mind was great at the time, but we don't want to be reminded that we liked it. I think sometimes watching a Pauly Shore movie is like looking at those terrible yearbook photos of you from like 6th grade with the parachute pants and the teased hair and the gigantic glasses and the braces.
The jams with the Spud McKenzie Party Animal T-shirt.
It's exactly
and
what
the
it's
rat
like.
tail.
And I know intellectually that Pauly Shore aged and advanced and moved on in life just like the rest of us. I know that he's not actively casting the pod, buddy, but at the same time, in my head, he's still that guy. And when you hear him talk, sometimes
He's still that guy, because those are his rhythms.
Yeah, that guy comes
Yeah.
out. Like, that guy is still there. He's a little more than that as well, but he is also that. And so it's a little disconcerting for me getting into the show.
I love Pauly Shore. I can understand why people could not like Pauly Shore. I think he's probably pretty polarizing, either you love him or you don't. But it's his rhythm. Man, I like his rhythms. And I'm going to say that this show in particular has a lot of comedic history in it. A ton of history about comedy, about stand-up is in this podcast. So even if you're not a Pauly Shore fan, there's still something in there for you.
If you don't know Pauly's story, Pauly is sort of comedy royalty.
Yeah, he grew up at the Comedy Store.
Literally
around everybody.
grew up.
Like
his mother and father ran the joint, owned the joint.
Well, you should listen to the Sammy Shore episode, which is, I'm going to say I've listened to all of them. My favorite episode is probably the Sammy Shore with commentary by Rudy Luca. It's great.
And they go into the history of the Comedy Store? In that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who started it, how long he ran it until Mitzi took over, and then, the history of the Comedy Store. The Comedy Store in itself is very interesting.
And other than maybe the Improv, the Comedy Store, one of the most important, comedy rooms in the country, I think, as far as like the place where name after name after name originated. That's their room that they go back to. That's the room that they came out of. That's the room where they formed their public personas.
Imagine being a child and Richard Pryor is like an uncle to you.
Yeah, he talks
Sam
about...
Kinison is like an uncle to you.
He talks about as a teenager, like not old enough to drive and go out yet even, and he's partying and doing drugs with Sam Kinison. It probably wasn't the best environment for a child. Great environment for a stand-up comic, though, probably.
And has fantastic stories.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a pretty new podcast.
Yeah.
It's only about 14 episodes deep. Right here in the host likability section, I'm just going to say this. I think Pauly will grow as an interviewer. He already has over these episodes. I went back and listened to one of the very first ones, if not, the very first one is the Robin Williams episode, the Rick Overton.
So we're talking about host likability.
Yeah, still in host likability.
Okay,
but I'm just talking about like how he does because the fact of the matter is the listener might be saying to themselves, why am I listening to this and not WTF? You guys have already said Mark Maron's
Yeah.
the best guy
Yeah.
to go through that history of comedy,
Yeah.
to go through a comic's life. This is an interesting case where there's an argument to be made because Pauly has a very particular viewpoint on the history of comedy, or the recent history of comedy especially. And so I think if there's anybody that's going to be able to make an argument for standing alongside it, Pauly's that guy. And he doesn't do the same thing that Mark does.
Well,
he
I
does
think-
it in this interesting way.
Yes, and I think Pauly also gives a rawer look at the stand-up scene, man. He will badger somebody about women or about drugs and throws out there like, hey, come on, like, it's no big deal. You're in the scene. People know that you've done a little coke.
Okay. So yes, maybe raw about about the comedy scene particularly.
Yeah.
I feel like Mark Maron gets to deeper, darker places, but you got to think Mark's interviews are more freeform too. Pauly is doing in about the same time frame. He's doing 2 interviews. So I'm thinking these are probably pretty heavily edited to fit together the way that they do, especially the first interview. I'm assuming that is a fairly edited interview with his main subject, and then the commentary might be pretty live and just reactionary. This is the way it feels to me.
It could be.
Yeah. All right, let's move on then to production values. How does he put this thing together? He uses music to segue bumpers.
Oh, yeah, and I will say that the thing that I did find irritating about the show would be sometimes you would get like a 10-second bite of the first interview, boom, music, a 40-second reaction, boom, music, a minute segment of the interview, music, 10-second reaction, like I don't think he's found how to put the stories together yet.
That's one of the reasons I say I think he's going to grow a lot as an interviewer. He's shown growth already over the first 14 episodes or so, but there's a lot of room for this thing to get better.
Yeah.
I think when you're listening to episode 100 in its own way, this might be as interesting an audio experience as a Serial or a This American Life or a Radio Lab, if they want to go there. And by they, I mean Pauly and his whole team. It's not Pauly doing it himself if he's actually editing this thing and putting it together. If it's low budget, a bootstrap organization, then that's not going to be the case. If he gets a real producer to be involved in this and they look at the bigger picture and they think about this as one story told by 3 different people, him and his 2 interview subjects, I think you can get to a really, really awesome place. Right now, it's not there. It's a little jumbled. It's a little messy as they go back and forth. It was hard to hold both thoughts in my head at the same time. What the first interview was about and then what the reaction commentary, what the through line for that conversation had been, it got jumbled several different times, particularly in the Michael Steele episode. That was, I thought, the worst. The Michael Steele to Jared Carmichael back and forth was the least cohesive of any of them.
I agree with almost nothing you just said.
You don't mind the back and forth? It's not problematic for you?
No, because I no, not at all. I think what may bother you is the idea of the show is you interview Chris Rock, right? And then you have, who was Davison? I think Tommy Davison was his commentator on it, right?
Yes, he was.
So what's going to happen there is Chris Rock may say something, and then Pauly and Tommy get sidetracked on something else because it'll spark a memory from Tommy about what it was like whenever Tommy was coming up. So they're not always going to be talking about the subject interview.
And I would be fine with that. It feels to me like they are rarely talking about the subject interview. And maybe that's because he's not good enough to lead the witness, as it were. Maybe that's because the editing isn't tight enough. But somewhere in there, I feel like I'm going to be much happier with episode 40 or 50 than I am with the 14th episode right now.
That's literally a blanket. What podcast gets worse after doing it 50 times?
Well, I guess nobody
exactly.
does. But, okay, fair enough. But I'm saying right now, I don't think this is right now, the way that they put the show together is cumbersome enough to be bothersome to me. It's a little clumsy, and so it's a negative for me right now.
One of the things that I think people either like or love about the show, but hopefully everyone will understand. And it's something that we do a terrible job of. Is Pauly Shore does a really good job of letting you know who he's interviewing, letting you know the name of the show, almost every in and out, almost every out into the actual interview. He'll say, "This is Pauly Shore. We're about to listen to an interview with so and so. Are you still interested?" And he'll do that literally every out. And then every end, he goes, "We're back with," and then says who he's with. And I think that's something that podcasters in general don't do very well. Like, I rarely call you by name, right? There's two of us. Our voices are pretty distinctive, but people still get us mixed up a lot. And one of the reasons is because I don't do a very good job of saying, "Well, what do you think, Joel?"
I agree. Absolutely. You should say my name more. Just say my name, say my name.
Right, but a lot of podcasts don't do a very good job of that. And so when we're listening to three, and that's not a skill they do well, we're going to put out some misinformation, almost assuredly.
That's a very good point.
But with the Pauly Shore podcast, he has it covered. For better, for worse, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, he does a good job of it, and I understand it and appreciate it.
I'll say that he does a good job of reminding you of who it is and where he is, but it's still hard to keep up with. Even though if he didn't do that every single time in and out, remind you of who he's with and interviewing, I wouldn't have any clue who any of them were. The whole thing would have been a giant blur of conversation, I think.
And so many podcasts miss that or don't do that. So I'm glad he does.
That's a very good point. All right, and that leaves audio quality. I will say this. Maybe it's not Mark Maron quality, but both the interviews are great. I hadn't heard a single one so far in the 4 or 5 episodes that I've listened to now that had any issues. Have you come across issues?
No, because I feel like he interviews both people. Like, they're both in the same room during each interview.
Yeah. He's going to them with a kit, or they're coming to his studio, or however the setup is.
Coming to the Comedy Store.
Yeah, I wonder how far out does he have part of the show recorded?
Man,
he's probably got dozens in the can, right?
Well,
and he's waiting for the right.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but I want to say he opened like on launch day. I want to say he launched 4 or somewhere around there, 4 or 6, all at once.
Well, we put out 5 episodes day one, and then another episode just a couple of days after that. I think that's a good way to launch a show. You want to have right out of the gate, you want to have a little bit of a sample size so that people have a real idea of what your show is going to be.
Right. Well, think about it. We listened to 3 because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you go any less than that, you don't know what the show's about, and why make them wait weeks and weeks and weeks to get their footing? I can listen to 3 all in one sitting, and then I know, hey, this is a show I'm going to be subscribed to week out and week in now. And we've already talked about host likability. We talked about production values. We talked about the content itself, and that gets down to our favorite moments. I got 3, and more than I ever imagined came from Larry the Cable Guy's discussions.
Yeah, really.
What a great interview he was, I thought. Like, I'm going to search out other places where he's been on podcasts. Well, I'm just going to tell you my favorite moments. Larry the Cable Guy was talking about Carrot Top. He says that all the comics, bashing on Carrot Top, you just worry about your own act. Maybe you'll be as famous as him someday. And the way that he put it, it's a simple thought. He was like, there's so much negativity surrounding him. You guys just don't worry about him, worry about your own stuff. But it's so completely true. Like, I'm not a big Carrot Top fan. I haven't been since I was a kid. And even at times I've been like, oh, what a hack comedian he is. Who am I? I'm a guy in the middle of Nowheresville that talks on the internet about other people's podcasts. Like,
see, I take the view of everywhere I am is someplace to be.
All right, fair enough. But what I'm saying is, like, that guy's out there doing his thing.
Yeah, sure.
Why does it bother you that people like what he does? That doesn't have anything to do with you, And I don't know. The way that Larry put it was so succinct. I was like, I felt very bad for any negativity I've put out towards Carrot Top after all this time. He comes off as a pretty good guy, too.
Yeah, I actually really like that episode. I have 2 moments that I really like.
Okay.
The first is in the Sammy Shore, Rudy Luca episode, because Sammy and Luca, they got to be like, they're in their 80s.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it was really great to go back and hear like him opening up for Sinatra or opening up for Elvis. And Pauly kept like hounding Luca about, right, but I mean, you were there as the writer for the ladies, right? Like, you're hanging around Elvis. There's obviously girls, right? Luca keeps not biting, not going for it, like using some misdirection, and he'd say stuff like, the jokes, the girls were there for the jokes, Pauly. That was all about the jokes back in that time. And then Pauly goes, okay, fair enough, but for everybody who can't see you, which is everyone listening to the show, he's winking right now.
Yeah, nice.
So I thought that was pretty neat. And then the Rodney Dangerfield episode with Rodney's wife and commentary by Andrew Dice Clay is Clay really calls Pauly out on badgering them or cutting him off or changing the subject when he's trying to tell a story, because it seems like Pauly will say something to get a reaction. If it doesn't go the way that he wants, or if he gets bored with it, he'll just cut off the story and try to direct it some other way, very ham-handedly, right?
Yes.
And Andrew Dice Clay so calls him out on it. He's like, well, I haven't even got to the story yet. I haven't even can I tell a story? Because you don't even. It's my story. You don't have it right. Let me finish the story.
You're right. Let me at least finish the story you asked me about before you ask me about a different one.
Yeah, I thought that was a gem.
But see, I think that's a great example. That almost never happens to Mark anymore because he spent thousands of hours asking people questions. You know, Mark Maron, I'm talking about, gets you to the place where he wants you to be, whether you want to go there or not, because he's intelligent in the way that he asks the questions.
Sure, but I think the comparison is unfair in this way.
Sure.
In this way, that it's Mark Maron and one person talking the entire hour about that person, their experiences, their past, their histories, their wants, their dreams, yada, yada. This one is Pauly Shore doing an interview and actively interrupting that interview to give you his and the commentator's point of view on what you just heard. It is impossible to do what Mark does in that format. You just can't. So
no, I agree.
Okay,
but I'm saying it's just like you watch sometimes on CNN or Fox News, and the interviewer leads the interviewee.
Sure.
To get the soundbite that they want so they can run it to promote the show. I'm saying a lot of times it's obvious that Pauly is pushing for this line that he knows they have in them to say about the comic or the time frame or the drugs or the women or whatever. And when he doesn't get it, he either goes to the next thing or interrupts to re-ask the question. And I'm saying a better interviewer, a more skilled interviewer, an interviewer who's been doing it longer wouldn't be so ham-handed about it. That's all I'm saying. I like Pauly. He's not done getting good at this yet. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Fair enough.
All right. So that brings us to the time on the show when we actually rate this thing. You've been in it from the long haul.
Yeah,
I'm assuming your
it.
rating's going to be pretty high here.
I think there's issues to it that I think could definitely make it better.
Okay.
I've thoroughly enjoyed all of it. I think this show is going to appeal to people who really came of age in the 90s and who know Pauly Shore and associate those two together. I think that's going to get a lot of people in and keep a lot of people listening. I think the content is interesting enough to grab the people who maybe don't know who Pauly Shore is or was never interested in his stuff in the 90s.
I agree.
Okay, so with that, I think that it can definitely appeal to both sets of people. It's something I listen to all of the time. I really, really like it. I can completely understand how maybe you don't with the points that you've given, how other people may not based on some of those same exact points and experiences. For me, though, it's a 2. I enjoy it, especially anybody in my age range. I'll probably almost always suggest it to.
I very much agree that people that remember Pauly Shore fondly, the people that are Pauly Shore fans, that if you ask them, hey, are you a fan of Pauly Shore? And they say yes, that this is going to be a show to suggest to them. I also think that there's the possibility that there are longtime WTF listeners. I'm trying to think of another longtime Nerdist listeners even, because there's a lot of comedy talk on that show as well. People who consider themselves fans of comedy or students of the history of comedy, long-term fans of comedy. Those people are going to be very interested in the show too, even if they don't stick with it over the long haul. That's the reason why I was drawn to it. The combination of his particular take on comedy and then the idea of getting 2 interviews at once effectively, that double take on things. I really enjoyed the episodes that I listened to. It's not it's not perfect yet, and the places where it's wrong, I think are so obviously correctable that they grate on me a little bit. Like they draw attention to themselves because the flaws are so few and far between. And what is really a nice package, a really interesting show. So I'm going to give it 1.5 overall.
Oh, really? That's surprising.
You were thinking I'd go with just like a 1?
Yeah.
No, I liked it quite a lot. I'm going to give it 1.5 with the idea that we're already this is episode 39, I think, or 40. So like we're not going to be able to fix this on the 50th episode probably with Revisited Volume 2, but at 75, I'm thinking,
you'll get to go back and
I think
re-rate
I may
this one.
go back all the way up to
All
a
right.
2 eventually on this one down the road. I got to give him a little time to stew. What I'm going to do, I'm going to seal him in his cask. I'm going to put him up on the shelf, let him age a little bit. There you go. I'll come back.
Right. You know what? I think I've found going through a bunch of different podcasts that I have an affinity for one that talks about the history of stand-up or has comedians on it, or the interviewers like Mark Maron or The Nerdist or this one with Pauly Shore interested. It's because, man, when I was younger, I always wanted to be a stand-up. Always.
I didn't really have dreams of being a stand-up.
I did, man. I wanted to be a stand-up. I wanted to get on Saturday Night Live, which is what really got me into WTF with Mark Maron and his history with that, and his like wanting to dig into what it's like auditioning and getting on to Saturday Night Live. I've always loved the Comedy Store, and if I didn't have the one handicap that I have, I would totally have gone for it.
What's that handicap?
I'm not funny.
Oh, yeah, that's a real handicap.
Yeah, so there's no way that was going to happen.
It's like the worst handicap you can have as a comedian. So that, my friends, is Pod on Pod's review of Pauly Shore's Interested podcast. You can find it at paulyshore.com. You can find us at podonpod.com. Don't forget to stop by and rate us in iTunes. We'd love to see your 5-star review in iTunes if you love us. If you don't, that's okay. You can rate us lower than that too. It's fine. iTunes or Stitcher for that. Find us at Pod on Pod, subscribe, and send us some feedback. You can email us podonpod@teamprocreate.com. You got anything else to add, sir?
Yeah, man. Have we talked about the Christmas show and what we're doing yet?
We haven't. That's a very good point. So next week is Christmas, and Christmas Eve falls on a Wednesday. That means that you're getting a special Christmas Eve episode of Pod on Pod. We got some buddies of ours, some friends, some fellow podcasters that are chipping in with this question answered. If you could give someone a podcast for Christmas this year, what show would it be, and to whom? So you're going to hear from the Weekly Planet podcast. You're going to hear from Ivy Envy. You're going to hear from I Hate Critics.
Yeah, right
which
on.
we were a part of their
Yeah.
Thanksgiving episode. And you're also going to hear from Mommy's Cocktail Hour and maybe some other special guests as the hour approaches.
Yeah, speaking of Ivy Envy, man, Corey was in the hospital.
All better now, apparently,
Yeah.
or he's back at work anyway.
Yeah.
He's back recording. We got his bit for the Christmas episode already, and they have posted new episodes on Ivy Envy as well.
Yeah, and so Ivy Envy's a Cubs podcast.
Yeah, we reviewed it, I think, episode 2.
Yeah, and what was great about it, well, not great, but, Corey has to go to the hospital, has a little hospital scare, and Cubs make the John Lester signing happen. I was like, oh, man, what a terrible time to be in the
He took one
hospital.
for the team.
Yeah. Could be that voodoo, man.
He's doing that dark magic up there. All right, be careful with that, Corey. Anyway, all right, well, we'll be back next week with that special Christmas episode of Pod on Pod. And then following Christmas, before we get to New Year's, you're going to hear our review of the Adam Carolla Show. It's a great one to go out on for 2014. And then we're going to kick into 2015 with some listener-requested shows.
Yeah.
A special history episode. We'll tell you more about that next week.
We're going to do another trifecta, much like we did with the Gotham podcast. Gave you 3 Gotham TV show podcasts that are coming out, and this is going to be 3 history podcasts.
All at the same time in one episode. Fun stuff. All of that coming soon here on Pod on Pod. Until next week, we're your hosts.
I'm Josh.
I'm Joel. Are you still what?
Interested.
That's right.
Are you wanting something funny? Are you wanting something smart? A show on astral projection or the history of art? Do you want to learn a language or how to play guitar? Just leave it up to Joel and Josh. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Pod on Pod is a proud member of the Procast Network, a Procreate production. Procreate is a community of artists in film, music, the digital arts, and fine arts that helps them connect and collaborate on projects. You can find out more at teamprocreate.com. For more great podcasts from the Procast Network, check out Movie Buzzed. Every week, your host, Zach, and some special guests review a new film. It's time for good friends, a great movie, and a good buzz. The Pod on Pod theme song was written and produced by Adam Dale. You can find more information about him on our website, as well as links to his forthcoming album, Cats and Dogs. Our musical guest this week is Ugo Capeto.